Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. And many of you know, perhaps, that International Finance Corporation is a member of the World Bank Group. It's an international institution focusing on private sector development in emerging markets. And the focus of the group is really the dual goal of reducing the poverty around the world and increasing shared prosperity. And the reason why I mentioned this up front is really something that we should all be very proud of and happy about. I'm very pleased to say that over the last decade, Azerbaijan has made remarkable progress in both of those areas, in both in reducing the poverty and bringing shared prosperity to its people. There's no question about that. The economic growth averaged 13% per year between 2002 and 2013. Very few countries around the world that can boast this kind of result. And Azerbaijan transitioned into a middle-income status thanks to high foreign direct investment in the oil sector, growing oil production and exports, and certainly high oil prices. Azerbaijan also shared its oil revenues quite prudently. It increased social transfers, it invested in infrastructure, and accumulated significant savings. And as a result, the poverty level declined from close to 50% in the early 2000s to around 5% in 2013, with extreme poverty, as we talk about it, falling from above 20% to under 3% during the same period. In addition, the improvements in living standards that were the result of this very significant growth caused a significant expansion of the middle class from 4% of the population to 30%. And that all happened despite the very significant international crisis in 2008 and 2009. So as I listen to the other speakers, we really have a very important messages across a number of sectors that have obviously developed over the past several years. And none of them actually spoke about oil. None of them spoke about oil sector. They spoke to all the various areas of progress across the economy. Now, we're dealing now with a very different economic environment in the past several years. And the challenge for the country is, of course, how to sustain this very impressive progress and how to deal with this much less favorable external environment. Clearly, the lower oil prices caused the economy to face strong headwinds in years ahead. It is clear from most analysis that the oil decline in the market is not a short-term development. It is likely that it's going to take a while before oil prices return to where they used to be, if they will ever return there. And this country needs to think about moving to a different growth model, relying much less on public resources and much more on private sector, which goes back to the topic of this short presentation. Attracting more private investment would take the pressure off the budget and enable a focus on investment in priority areas while ensuring fiscal sustainability. I'm not going to quote too many numbers, but I want to quote a few numbers. I want to say that currently, the private sector in Azerbaijan accounts for 85% of GDP, yet only for 25% of domestic investment, and even less of all budget revenues. Private investment in Azerbaijan's non-oil sector stands at just 4% of GDP. So, when you look at these numbers, it's clear that the roles of the public and private sectors going forward need to be rebalanced, with the private sector becoming the main driver of growth and the public sector becoming a facilitator of growth. What does it mean to be a facilitator of growth from our perspective? Again, looking at many, many emerging markets around the world. So facilitating role of the public sector means really creating a favorable environment for the private sector to succeed. And that means increasing the quality of supporting public services, developing infrastructure, which this country has been doing quite effectively for a number of years already, enhancing the quality of the labor force through vocational and higher level education, stimulating innovation and R&D, promoting competitive exports. It also means fostering conducive business climate, a business climate which provides strong property rights, provides environment for enforcing contracts, streamlines tax administration, and gives equal treatment to companies. It also means introducing adequate regulation, regulatory framework, certainly in the financial sector, which is the closest to my heart, but really not only across the economy. And that regulatory framework needs to really open up the markets to competition and to increase financial intermediation. It is clear that the government of Azerbaijan is moving along all those three directions: the supporting services, the conducive business climate, working on regulatory framework. But we all know that there's still a number of areas where improvements can be made. I'll talk very briefly about three specific directions. I know we're very short on time this afternoon, but I wanted to say a few words about business environment. I want to say a few words about financial sector development, and finally about infrastructure. All those three areas are very key to our strategy in Azerbaijan and across Europe and Central Asia, but really across emerging markets. On business environment. To achieve sustainable private sector growth, Azerbaijan needs to deepen investment climate reforms in a wide range of areas. Again, just one number, Azerbaijan has moved by 8 spots in a recent Doing Business ranking. So clearly it is one of the most rapidly reforming countries across 189 countries around the world which are being ranked. However, there are still a lot of challenges. And if you talk to any of the business people in this room or certainly in the market, you would hear about them. Broader investment climate reforms focusing on institutions and governance, investments in integration are key to assuring a longer-term competitiveness of the economy. There are certainly successes. I'm told about the Agency for Public Service and Social Innovation, ASAN, the agency which has really created a one-stop shop approach to service delivery and really showed that competitive provision of public services can be a benefit to both citizens and the firms and really be very effective. Our priorities as IFC in this country, and many of you have probably come across our work on business environment reforms, it's really the support for regulatory reforms aimed at reducing compliance costs for the private sector, and certainly focus on simplifying tax administration procedures. Again, a lot of progress has been made, but we also know that private sector, especially SMEs, choose to pay taxes according to very simplified methods just because it's less expensive. The other area of our work in business environment is certainly supporting the improvements in a business environment for agribusiness. Again, we heard this morning quite a bit about agribusiness, and we all know that this is an area of competitive advantage for the country. So how do we work on agri-standards and food safety and strengthening agribusiness value chains in a way that this long-term competitive sustainability can be achieved? Financial sector. I'll make just a few very brief comments on what types of things we have in mind and where we would like to encourage the government to promote deeper financial intermediation. Ultimately, the objective is to mobilize domestic savings, to channel them into productive areas of investments in a corporate sector, and especially micro, small, and medium enterprises, which are crucial to diversification of this economy, to job creation, to inclusive growth. Ourselves as IFC, we have been working with about 10 different financial institutions in Azerbaijan. The portfolio of the companies and banks with whom we've been working increased 5 times in the past 4 years in their medium and small size business. So certainly this is very encouraging and a very rapid growth area. But at the same time, in various surveys, 3 out of every 4 SMEs say that they've never applied for a loan. 1/3 of them does not have bank accounts. And certainly lending in urban areas, in the cities, is much easier than getting access to finance in small towns, in rural areas. So clearly, there's a lot of opportunity to make things easier for SMEs, for small and medium-sized enterprises. The priorities in the financial infrastructure to help with that. It's really about strengthening consumer protections. It's about encouraging responsible lending. It's about improving credit reporting and, in particular, creating a private credit bureau that can support the financial institutions and making proper risk decisions. It's about introduction of movable collateral registries that would help the banks promote secure transactions. It's about promoting financial literacy, especially among small and medium-sized enterprises and farmers. It's also about introduction of the more competitive channels of delivering financial services, such as internet banking or mobile banking. And I'll stop for a second about this last point. You know, clearly, there's an opportunity to provide more financial services to populations, to companies in this country. It's really hard to stimulate innovation when the level of competition is relatively low. How does one increase the level of competition? You bring in more private sector participants to the financial sector, you bring in international investors, international financial institutions, and on those criteria, things can be better than they are today. Certainly, it helps that there's a strong public sector financial participation in the economy during the times of crisis. It's good, but in order to increase the level of competition, increase access to financial sector technologies, one may want to think about it differently going forward. Capital markets, just briefly. It was very interesting to hear about the development of the pension fund. This is certainly an area of a significant opportunity of how to create opportunities for financing growth in a non-oil sector. Today, banks comprise 90% of the financial sector in Azerbaijan. There is a significant opportunity of how to increase other participants in the financial sector, the insurance, private equity, asset managers. All these areas are still at the very early stages of development. So we very much welcome government efforts on a new capital markets development strategy. This is something that can certainly give a big boost to creating a financial capital markets. But of course, a lot of reforms, a lot of decisions would have to follow. Briefly about infrastructure. Infrastructure is an area where the government made a lot of progress in the past several years. There's no question about it. And certainly the enabling environment for companies, private and public, to function in this country, in this economy, have improved significantly through improving access to roads, to power, to pipelines. But more can be done. And in an environment of shrinking fiscal flexibility that this country and many other emerging markets around the world are going to experience, complementing public resources with private sector resources becomes increasingly important. There's certainly a lot of mechanisms used around the world in bringing private sector participation to infrastructure. The public-private partnerships that outsource provision of key infrastructure services to either private operators or operators that work closely with the public sector. And this is an area of opportunity that using the asset base that has been developed over the past several years using public resources can really generate significant revenues and investment for this economy. A couple of areas of specific interest in infrastructure. It's certainly power, it's transport, water, solid waste. Based on our experience in emerging markets, those are areas where Azerbaijan can do quite well in attracting private sector investment. Very short summary in conclusion. From our perspective, for Azerbaijan to continue this impressive growth that I talked about in the beginning, we believe as an international finance institution that the private and public sector relative needs and roles need to be rebalanced in Azerbaijan. I think there's a lot of recognition from the government on this, and I've read speeches that confirm that. There is certainly significant progress in the regulation of business registration and inspection that already has happened, but it needs to be complemented with a broader business climate reforms. And we talk about permits, we talked about institutional reforms and governance. There is a big priority on expanding access to finance beyond urban areas and really focusing on rural, small towns, and medium and small-sized enterprises. And finally, we believe that infrastructure could significantly benefit from private sector investment and experience, both in terms of efficiency and also in terms of bringing additional long-term capital and know-how. And that can be particularly well done through public and private partnerships. And from our perspective, only when one can put together progress in all these areas, you can really talk about long-term sustainable non-oil growth in a country like Azerbaijan. So I look forward to the discussion, if we have time left for it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.